What if I told you that the weather conditions you experience may find their roots elsewhere? That was the case this summer in Pennsylvania and other parts of the country where smoke settled into the air from Canadian wildfires. But how do wildfires in Canada make their way down to the United States? Dan Tomaso is a meteorologist with ABC 27 in Harrisburg, and he joins us to talk about those issues and more. That's all coming up right here, right now. I'm Sam Chen, and this is Face the Issues. Good evening and welcome to Face the Issues. I'm Sam Chen. Most of us in this viewing area and in other parts of our country experienced extra smoke this summer. And most of us are aware that this smoke didn't originate anywhere in our backyard, but came from wildfires in Canada. And that raises the million-dollar question, what do wildfires in Canada have to do with air quality in the United States? So we're joined tonight by Dan Tomaso. He's meteorologist at ABC 27, and he's going to help us break down this mystery. Dan, welcome to Face the Issues, and perhaps I should say, welcome to the Smoke Show.
Yeah, the Smoke Show, or the Summer of Smoke, as I've said a few times. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure for us to have you. Thank you for taking the time. Dan, let's just start from the top. The smokiness, I mean, we've heard it so many times that this came from wildfires in Canada. Can you just kind of give us that 30,000 foot level? Like, where did this smoke originate and things like that?
It's funny you mentioned 30,000 feet because that's where the explanation kind of starts. So we have to look at the jet stream, which in a very basic sense, the jet stream is the main carrier of weather. I like to say it's the UPS or FedEx of weather that moves across the country. And generally speaking, it moves west to east. If you're on a plane flying from San Francisco to Baltimore or Philadelphia, you'll get a tailwind most of the time. That's the jet stream pushing the plane along. And sometimes you'll hear the pilot say, we've saved maybe 20, 30 minutes on your flight thanks to the extra boost of that tailwind. So that's kind of the overall picture of how weather gets from West Coast to East Coast. But there are occasions where that flow gets disrupted and we end up with what are called bulges or dips in the jet stream. And that's easy enough to think about, just kind of this big overall hump, if you will, in the jet stream, or big overall trough. And so those humps or ridges are really the problem makers when it comes to heat and humidity in the summertime. We call it the Bermuda high effect, that we get a lot of heat and humidity from the south in Pennsylvania when we're under a big ridge of high pressure. But on occasions, when we're no longer under that ridge, or the ridge kind of shifts a little bit, we can get winds out of the north that could stick around for several days. And so in the beginning of the summer, we had a weather pattern that just kept leading to areas of northerly wind coming in from Canada. And unfortunately, Canada was just as hot as we were, in some cases even hotter. And so whether it was lightning that started wildfires, or unfortunately carelessness of campers, or believe it or not, cigarettes coming out of car windows along highways, wildfires start, that smoke ends up in the air, and with the right wind conditions, it essentially floats in our direction. Now, sometimes it stays at that 30,000 feet level, but when it's really concentrated, as we saw during early June, it also gets near the ground too. You could see it coming.
Yeah, Dan, let me ask you this. So it is not simply that there were fires in Canada, therefore there was smoke in the United States. So there's a bit of like lightning in the bottle here. There's, I apologize for all the weather puns. There are fires in Canada, and then to your point, there's a change in the flow, which is what brings the smoke down toward the United States.
Yes, and unfortunately, that change in the flow in early June was unprecedented how long it lasted. I mean, we were basically in a very stagnant weather pattern that had days of this northerly flow, and that's when what we call the AQI, or the air quality index, really spiked, meaning very poor air quality. Now, that was kind of our bout with it, but then in July, the Great Lakes and the Chicago area had a very bad bout with the wildfires. And you may say, what happened over that month between June and July? Didn't the wildfire situation improve? Didn't they put them out? Well, if you look at Canada, it may not totally surprise you, there is a lot of woodland, a lot of forest areas. And many times, if it's nowhere near a high population area, those fires are just let to burn themselves out. And so those fires continued for a month, 2 months at a time. So even though our weather wasn't immediately impacted. It just picked another part of the country to affect.
Dan, so in the past, we've experienced some smokiness from wildfires in California. You think a few summers ago, and that's 3,000 miles. I mean, this is coming from Canada. Obviously, Pennsylvania was affected, but you go down south, Washington D.C., Virginia had quite a bit of smokiness. There's photographs of that haze just kind of settling over the Capitol building in D.C. How far does this smoke travel?
Well, to kind of give you an idea of how far smoke and particulates can travel, sometimes in the middle of the summer, we get Saharan dust to move into Pennsylvania, the mid-Atlantic, and the deep south. So that's coming all the way from the west coast of Africa across the Atlantic Ocean into the United States. So that's thousands of miles. And, think about all the weather in between that could have knocked that down or knocked it back. When you're in a dry weather pattern, particulate matter, like smoke, like dust, can travel thousands of miles undisturbed. Now, it is rare that you get so much dry weather for that to happen, but keep in mind, we were in a drought at the same time. So all of Pennsylvania and the Northeast especially, so even going into New England, Massachusetts, Connecticut, we were all in a drought. So it's kind of the perfect storm, if you will. We had very dry weather, so there was nothing to kind of rain out this particulate matter, the smoke. And so it was just days upon days of this buildup, and it just kept sinking farther and farther south. And so it can reach places as far south as Florida under the right conditions.
Wow. Speaking about that, the different areas it reaches, some areas seem to have it worse, right? So the Lehigh Valley, where our studio is based, seem to be a lot worse. You're looking at, so we'll talk about some of those numbers, but a lot of these numbers are reading close to 500. But even just a county or two over, Berks County, Lebanon County, it was bad, but the numbers were still less. Is there a reason why some areas will get it worse and other areas that seem to be relatively kind of in that same region get it not as bad?
Sure. So I think in the case that you're talking about, that was a day where the wind was coming in from the northeast. And so it was funneled down through the Lehigh Valley, and the mountains and the valley act like a bowl, and it basically collects the dust, the smoke, the particulate matter, anything that's in the air, any pollution. So yes, the valley locations can be worse than, say, the mountain locations. You can kind of think about if you fill a bowl of water, instead of water, you're filling the bowl with smoke. And if you kind of get to the edges, you could kind of poke your way out through it. If you flew in a plane, you could probably get through the plume of smoke and out away from it. But of course, we're stuck at the ground. And so all that accumulation into the bowl, if you will, into the valley was occurring. And if you remember New York City, some of the pictures coming in of the orange skyline and the orange behind the Statue of Liberty, that was all smoke and particulate matter blocking sunlight. And so that just kind of funneled right through the Lehigh Valley. And by the time it got to, say, Lebanon County, Lancaster County, even farther to the south, it had dispersed enough it wasn't as concentrated. So that's the other part of this too. It's something called dispersion, that basically you can get these high concentration areas, but it does begin to thin out as it gets away from the main concentration.
You said earlier, Dan, that the valley acts like a bowl, and so it kind of traps this in. Is there an opposite effect where if you're in the plains, you think Midwest United States, where this will tend to just kind of blow through quicker because it is so level?
Right, and so that's, if anyone's ever lived in the high plains, the Midwest, that's where you get your blizzards. That's where you get the wind just ripping through. There's no mountains in between to kind of slow the wind down. So mountains are great at helping to slow down the wind, change wind patterns. And even though the Allegheny Front or the Appalachian Mountains in Pennsylvania aren't very large compared to the Rockies, they have a significant impact on East Coast weather every single day. They're kind of like rumble strips on the highway, if you will. It's just enough to kind of dampen the wind, dampen the flow, and change things. So when weather's coming in west to east, you get that effect. But if wind is coming from the northeast, for instance, the Poconos too could add that dampening effect.
What happened to the smoke? I mean, we heard some people say it's going to be here all summer, listen, it was significant, but it feels like it just disappeared. What happened? Why did it go away? I guess is the first question.
So the overall jet stream pattern changed, especially for the end of July and August. Now, we did have a recent bout of it coming from central Canada, a different spot. There were more wildfires in central and western Canada, but the smoke, instead of being very concentrated at the ground, was higher up in the atmosphere, so it didn't affect us. what we saw in June is extremely rare, that it stays so concentrated at the ground. I won't forget it because my baby daughter was born 2 days before the smoke got really bad. And so my wife and I were saying, of course, we have a baby daughter, and now we can't be outside because you have to be careful with infants and the elderly or anyone sensitive to air quality issues, but especially the young and the old. And so for us, it was like, what do we do with this child? We have this time off to be with her, but we can't be outside. We're trapped inside. But on the day that it got really bad, so I live in the Hershey area, I live on the other side of a small hill, and you could actually see the plume coming in over our heads across the hill.
Wow.
And then settling down in our little valley here. It was one of the most insane weather features I've seen personally.
Wow. Well, first, congratulations on becoming a dad. That's awesome. Where did the smoke then leave to? I mean, it dissipates, it disappears. Is it traveling elsewhere, or where did it go?
Yeah, so the plume just moves on, essentially. It doesn't totally disappear. What's interesting is there's particulate matter all the time around us, and it comes from our cars, it comes from industry. So anything that has an engine, essentially combustion, can create particulate matter. And so there's particulates all the time in the air that helps actually make clouds. Water droplets stick to the particulates, and then you basically start a cloud by a very a few small molecules. But essentially, that high concentration of smoke was blown out of the region by a change in the wind, and it just either moved on over the ocean or over areas to the north and northeast. And my experience at Penn State, I actually traveled over the ocean to start a PhD project to study dispersion of air molecules and air pollution over the ocean. So even though the story kind of ended for folks on the East Coast, there's a whole Atlantic Ocean in between where that smoke, that dust, that pollution ends up settling.
Wow, that's fascinating. Dan, we're going to cut the break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about the numbers that everybody was quoting, and I think most of us had no idea what they meant. And then also how people should kind of watch the weather, what we should look for, and how we can take care of ourselves when the weather gets crazy. So don't go away. We'll be right back.
Face the Issues is produced and recorded in the studios of Lighthouse TV. Positively different. Watch Lighthouse TV wherever you go. Available on Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and Apple TV. You can view our in-house studio productions on demand, or watch what's on the station right now with our 24/7 live stream. Search Lighthouse TV online on your streaming device, or go to our website for more information. Visit lighthousetv.org to stay connected. There you can find out what's currently on the air and coming up. How to watch in your area on cable, satellite, broadcast, or streaming devices. Watch past programs or our live stream. Follow us on social media and learn more about the station, our hosts, and our programming. Lighthouse TV, positively different.
Welcome back to Face the Issues. Dan, thank you again for joining us. I want to shift the conversation a little bit to how we look at weather, not necessarily as a meteorologist, but for us who don't understand the maps that you're looking at, and we're looking at on our phone, what all this stuff means. So I want to start with just a question of air quality. I mean, during this summer, with all the smokiness, we heard people talk about air quality is good, it's bad, it's moderate, it's fair. There's the red, yellow, or orange and green on our phones. What does that actually mean in practical terms? And how do they decide when air quality is good or moderate or bad?
So part of that goes back to simple monitoring. There are monitoring stations all across the country. And this is kind of a little known secret, but central Pennsylvania has, in general, pretty poor air quality during the summer. And it actually goes back to the interstates, 83, 81, 95 in the Mid-Atlantic. And when you think about all the traffic that goes through there, I mentioned that a lot of this air pollution comes from combustion, so engines. All that soot and debris is being thrown up into the air, and that's what leads to poor air quality. That leads to a lot of our haze in central and eastern Pennsylvania, too. So already before the smoke episode happened, there's been air quality issues for decades in this area. But basically what's been done is there are monitors placed in select locations across Pennsylvania and through Maryland, Virginia, where this is monitored daily, 24/7. And what those monitors do, they monitor how much particulate matter is in the air, how much ozone is in the air. Both are damaging to your lungs. There's been many medical research studies showing that you shouldn't be breathing these items in for very long, that it does long-term damage to the interior of your lungs. And so those studies then kind of inform the decisions about the colors that you're seeing. So you don't have to interpret, oh, this is a 200 AQI day. All you really need to do is look at the colors. If there's a yellow or orange day, and say you're an asthmatic, that's a day that you probably should limit your time outdoors. Or contractors, on days where it's in the red or the purple, perhaps those contracting teams shouldn't be out for 6, 7, 8-hour work days. That it's not good. Long-term exposure to that type of air is similar to smoking cigarettes.
Wow. You mentioned AQI numbers. That's the air quality index, if
Yes.
I'm correct on that. There's this range 0 to 500. They said, if you're at a certain number, you're bad. What are they measuring? What is the AQI?
So that's the combination of the particulate matter and the ozone factor being calculated. And so basically they came up with a round number, if you will, to help inform the public. So usually speaking, in the summertime, we can be 100 to 200 on the AQI. That's fairly typical. And those are days where you might want to limit time outside. And the Department of Environmental Protection will usually put out a note, an issuance saying today is a code orange day. When it gets really bad, a code red day to stay inside. And the days that we had with the smoke, we were well over 200 AQI for days. And so those were numbers that are not typical for this area. And that's why everyone was on so high alert to stay indoors, use some type of air filtration. That's the nice part about having HVAC units in homes and businesses, that you already have that filter to get rid of the particulate matter that can hurt your lungs.
Yeah, what else should we look for when we look at a weather report, when we're watching you on TV? Or I think most of us pick up our phone in the morning and we go, okay, here's the temperature. Here it's sunny, it's rainy. But there's a lot of other things, whether it's the air quality, whether it's real feel, or the dew point. What are other things that we should look for that we may not always understand what we're looking at?
So dew point's probably the easiest one for people to understand. So when you hear dew point, you think of dew, you kind of think of moisture. When the dew point is over 65 degrees, that's when it's kind of the air you can wear outside. That's when you feel that wall as you step outside, that the air seems thick. And the reason it seems thick is that our body loses its natural ability to cool down easily. So the reason why we all sweat, as gross as it sounds, is to cool off. That condensation on your body helps to remove heat when it's evaporated. And so when there's a lot more moisture, when that dew point is high, as I said, above 65 degrees, all of a sudden your body sweats, but it doesn't evaporate as quickly because there's so much water in the atmosphere around you. And so your body's working overtime to cool down. And essentially then the heat index, the reason why that's important is that is the heat and humidity combined. So add your temperature, add your dew point. That's how they factor in what the heat index, what it feels like to you as a human outside. So it could be 82 degrees air temperature, but the dew point is around 70 degrees. It may feel like 90.
Wow. You mentioned earlier, Dan, with some of the air quality issues, I'm sure with humidity issues as well, there's precautions that we should take. Who should be the most cautious when we see a code orange or code red, or even higher dew points or real field temperatures?
Right. So basically the young and the old should be very careful. So whether that's infants, babies, essentially anybody that has a hard time cooling themselves down. And so for babies, it's very hard for them to, at times, regulate their internal temperature. So that's why we're concerned if they're on the heat for very long. Same too with the elderly. The elderly could get dehydrated, confused very quickly in the heat if they're not staying hydrated, if they're not finding a cool place. But truly anyone can suffer from heat danger. And that's the most physically present person that you can find. And the reason I say that is when you go into heat stroke or when you are exhausted from the heat, it's very hard to tell. You don't feel that differently until it hits you. And so on days where the heat index is high, it's always good to find some shade. It's always good to drink water. Give yourself some time, give yourself some breaks. You're not invincible.
And what advice do you give to people in a situation like we had this summer with the smoke? Obviously, we hear people say stay home, but what about, you mentioned earlier, people who do contract work or construction work, sometimes they have to be out. Is there a way that they can protect themselves amid the smoke or amid the heat?
So the easiest thing to do is to take breaks. I mean, obviously, we all can't avoid being outside all the time. So, if you're a runner, for instance, and you're used to running outside for 20 or 30 minutes, maybe limit it some on a day where the air quality is poor. If you're a contractor, try to give your crew more breaks. Try to bring them in either to the shade or some air conditioning to some fresh air, because again, the long-term exposure is the concern. It's not necessarily what happens that day, but it's over years of exposure, similar to, as I mentioned, smoking cigarettes, that one day is not necessarily so harmful as it is an accumulation effect.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think most people realize how severe it can be, to your point, like smoking cigarettes is kind of the impact that such bad air quality can have.
Correct.
Dan, let me ask you this. I know it's always tricky when we ask meteorologists to predict the future. You said that the smoke situation was rare, that, again, with combination of a few elements. Is this something you expect us to see at that degree again in the future? Is this like a new trend that we might be seeing, or do you think this is more or less a rare one-off kind of situation?
I do think it's rare, and I do think it's more of a one-off situation. However, we always have to monitor drought. And the reason is areas of drought can have wildfires. We also had wildfires in central and southern New Jersey this year, wildfires in Hawaii. And so when you look at the overall trends, monitoring drought is so very important. And we had some moderate drought conditions here in Pennsylvania. We have a lot of forested areas. I have not witnessed a wildfire of any magnitude here in Pennsylvania that's been concerning, but in the future, could there be one? Absolutely. And so maybe it's not from Canada necessarily that we get smoke, but from other areas of the country too. It's all possible. You mentioned the western part of the United States, California, Oregon, Washington. Those are usually the more typical areas we get smoke from, and that can lead to the haze and kind of the weird colors across the sky. But under the right conditions, if Canada has a drought and Canada has an outburst of wildfires, that's how we can get smoke.
Yeah. So I think it's great advice for our viewers, what you had said about taking breaks, protecting yourself, and just keeping your eye on the air quality.
Absolutely. And, there are many resources out there too. AirNow, so AIRNOW.gov, is the free taxpayer-based organization of the EPA that you can find all sorts of different tidbits and tips about how to stay safe and also monitor air quality. It's all there for you. It's not behind a paywall. It is free and available to you because you as the taxpayer have provided that.
Airnow.gov. Dan, thank you so much for breaking that down. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Watch Lighthouse TV wherever you go. Available on Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and Apple TV. You can view our in-house studio productions on demand, or watch what's on the station right now with our 24/7 live stream. Search Lighthouse TV online on your streaming device, or go to our website, lighthousetv.org, for more information. Lighthouse TV, positively different.
Welcome back to Face the Issues. Dan, thank you again for joining us. And as we close, we really appreciate your insight, your expertise. One of the things that we love doing on this show is getting to know our guests beyond the issues that they work on. And you've been a meteorologist, you've been at ABC for quite some time. Curious, what got you into meteorology?
So I'm very fortunate in my life and in my career that I got to live in this area first. Not many people in broadcast get to do that. So I grew up watching ABC 27. I grew up watching a gentleman named Chuck Rhodes, which I hope some of the viewers remember him. He was our chief meteorologist at ABC 27 for over 30 years. And I looked up to him. I thought, man, this guy has a good time doing his job. He was funny. He was making noises while explaining the weather. He had little cartoons that he called the weather weenies going across the screen. And so I wanted to be Chuck. And I was kind of a shy kid at the time, but I reached out to Chuck. He emailed me back. This was back in 2003. And he came to my school, St. Catherine Labouré in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and joined me on what we called our little Royal News Network. And he basically said to me, he's like, if you go to Penn State and you study hard and you work hard, maybe someday you can work here at ABC 27. And I literally took that advice. I got very lucky with the timing, but I've been with Eric Finkenbinder and Brett Thackeray and the team since 2009.
Wow. And Dan, you did go to Penn State. In fact, you went to grad school and you were in the PhD program you alluded to earlier. So this is not just your job, but you've done extensive research in the area. What made you choose the meteorologist on-air position over being behind stacks of books and doing the research?
For whatever reason, I fell in love with TV because you kind of get to teach and talk to people at the same time. Sure, we're not, beating everyone over the head with the calculus and the physics of meteorology, which you have to take at Penn State, but it's your opportunity to kind of educate the public with how weather and climate works. And you do develop a special connection. You're kind of the scientist in their living room every single day with maybe them not even realizing it. So I think it's a very unique opportunity, a unique voice to have. And I certainly take that responsibility at a high level.
I think $1 million question for anybody who's watching this is not a meteorologist. The screen behind you is a green screen. How do you know where you're pointing and what you're looking at?
So we do have sheet screens. That's kind of the secret, that the green wall never changes behind me, but on the sides and in front of us, we have screens that we can reference to see where we're standing. But you really do over time get to know your graphics. It's kind of like riding a bike. And so there are days where I don't feel like I'm paying attention to the monitors much at all, that I know where stuff is located and I know what I'm talking about in terms of the television graphics. And that's when it becomes fun, when it just becomes a conversation. It's not a PowerPoint. Anyone can stand up and give a PowerPoint presentation, right, and read off the screen. But you're trying to be entertaining and fun and talk about something that people like, and that's the weather.
Yeah. Well, Dan, we really appreciate what you do every day and really appreciate you taking your time today to join us. And talk about something that's been the talk of the town, the state, the country throughout the summer, and deeply appreciate your insights and your time.
Absolutely. Hopefully now that we move past summer, we're getting out of this phase, but legitimately, anytime there's drought, and there's been a lot of it across the country and Canada, it could come back. So we'll always be watching for it.
Yeah, and we'll be relying on you to keep us informed. So Dan Tomaso from ABC 27, thank you so much, Dan, for your time, for joining us.
Sure. Thank you, Sam. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. I want to again thank Dan Tomaso from ABC 27. Of course, thanks to each of you for tuning in. We hope to see you again right back here next week. On behalf of all of us at Face the Issues, my name is Sam Chen. Thank you and good night.